Hello and welcome. Today I'll be reading Arundathi Rai's The Good of Small Things, beginning with chapter 1, that is Paradise Pickles and Preserves. May in IMNM is hot brooding month. The days are long and humid, the river shrinks and the black crows gorge on the bright mangoes and still, dusk green trees. Red bananas ripen, jackfruit bursts, dissolute blue bottles hum vacuously in the fruity air. Then they stun themselves against clear window panes and die, flatly baffled in the sun. The nights are clear but suffused with sloth and sullen expression. But by early June, the southwest monsoon breaks, and there are 3 months of wind and water with short spells of sharp, glittery sunshine that thrill children snatch to play with. The countryside turns an immodest green. Boundaries blur as tapioca fences take root and bloom. Brick walls turn moss green. Pepper vines snake up electric poles, wild creepers burst through laterite banks and spill across flooded roads. Boats ply in the bazaars, and a small fish appear in the puddles that fill the PWD potholes on the highways. It was raining when Raheel came back to IMN. Slanting river rope slammed into loose earth, blowing it up like gunfire. The old house on the hill wore its steep, glapped roof pulled over its ear like a low hat. The walls streaked with moss had grown soft and bulged a little like the dampness that seeped up from the ground. The wild, overgrown garden was full of whisper and scurry of small lives. In the undergrowth, a rat snake rubbed itself against a glistening stone. Hopeful yellow bullfrogs cruised the scummy ponds for mates. A drenched mongoose flashed across the leaf-strewn driveway. The house itself looked empty. The doors and windows were locked, the front veranda bare, unfurnished. But the sky-blue Plymouth with chrome tile fence was still parked outside and inside. Baby Kochama was still alive. She was Raheel's baby grandaunt. Her grandfather's younger sister. Her name was really Naomi Ipe. But everyone called her baby. She became a baby Kochama when she was old enough to be an aunt. Raheel hadn't come to see her though. Neither niece nor baby grand labored under any illusions on that account. Raheel had come to see her brother Esther. They were two egg twins. Dizygotic, doctors call them. Born from separate but simultaneously fertilized eggs. Esther Esthapan was the older by 18 minutes. They never did look much like each other, Esther and Raheel. And even when they were thin-armed children, flat-chested, worm-ridden, and Elvis Presley puffed, there was none of the usual who is who and which is from which. Over-smiling relatives or the Syrian Orthodox bishops who frequently visited IMN House for donations. The confusion lay in a deeper, more secret place in those early amorphous years when memory had only just begun, when life was full of beginnings and no ends. And everything was forever. Esthapan and Rahul thought of themselves together as me, and separately, individually, as we or us. As though they were a rare breed of Siamese twins, physically separate but with joint identities. Now, these years later, Raheel had a memory of waking up one night, giggling at Esther's funny dream. She has other memories too that she has no right to have. She remembers, for instance, what the Orange drink, lemon drink man, dead to Esther in the Abhilash talkies. She remembers the taste of tomato sandwiches, Esther sandwiches, and Esther ate on Madras mail to Madras. And these are only the small things. Anyway, now she thinks of Esther and Raheel as them, because separately, the two of them are no longer what they were or ever thought they would be. Ever. Their lives have a size and shape now. Esther has his and Raheel hers. Edges, borders, boundaries, brings and limits have appeared like a team of trolls on their separate horizons. Short creatures with long shadows patrolling the blurry end. Gentle half moons have gathered under their eyes, and they're as old as Amma was when she died. 31. Not old, not young, but a viable, diable age. They were nearly born on a bus, Esther and Raheel. The car in which Baba, their father, was taking Amu, their mother, to the hospital in Shillong to have them broke down on the Winding Tea Estate Road in Assam. They abandoned the car and flagged down a crowded state transport bus. With the queer compassion of very poor for comparatively well off, or perhaps only because they saw how hugely pregnant Amu was. Seated passengers made room for the couple, and for the rest of the journey, Esther and Raheel's father had told their mother's stomach had to hold their mother's stomach to prevent it from wobbling. That was before they were divorced and Amu came back to their lives in Kerala. According to Esther, if they had been born in the bus, they would have got free bus rides for the rest of their lives. It wasn't clear where he got this information from, or he knew these things. But for years, the twins harbored a faint resentment against their parents, having diddled them out of a lifetime free bus rides. They also believed that if they were killed on a zebra crossing, the government would pay for their funerals. They had the definite impression that that was what zebra crossings were meant for. Free funerals. Of course, there were no zebra crossing to get killed on in Yemen. Or, for that matter, even in Kottayam, which was the nearest town. But they had seen some from the car window, which when they went to Cochin was a 2-hour drive away. The government never paid for Sophie Moll's funeral because she wasn't killed on a zebra crossing. She had hers in IMM in the old church with the new paint. She was Esther and Raheel's cousin, their uncle Chaco's daughter. She was visiting from England. Esther and Raheel was 7 years old when she died. Sophie Moll was almost 9, and she had a special child-sized coffin, satin-lined, brass handle shinned. She lay it in her yellow crimple bell-bottoms with her hair in a ribbon and made in England go bag that she loved. Her face was pale and as wrinkled as the dhobi's thumb from being in water for too long. The congregation gathered around the coffin, and the yellow church swelled like a throat with the sound of a sad singing. The priests with curly beards swung pots of frankincense on chains and never smiled at the babies the way they did on a usual Sunday. The long candles on altar were bent, the short ones weren't. An old lady, masquerading as a distant relative, put cologne on a wad of cotton wool with a devout and gently challenging air, dabbed it on Sophie Moll's forehead. Sophie Moll smelled of cologne and coffin wood. Margaret Kochama, Sophie Moll's English mother, wouldn't let Chaco, Sophie Moll's biological father, put his arm around her to comfort her. The family stood huddled together. Margaret Kochama, Chaco, baby Kochama, and next to her, her sister-in-law, Mammachi Esther, and Raheel's grandmother. Mammachi was almost blind and always wore dark glasses. When she went out of the house, her tears trickled down from behind them and trembled along her jaw like raindrops on the edge of a roof. She looked small and ill in her crisp off-white sari. Chaco was Mamachi's only son. Her own grief grieved her. His devastated her. Though Ammu, Esther, and Rahil were allowed to attend the funeral, they were made to stand separately. Not with the rest of the family, nobody would look at them. It was hot in the church, and the white edges of the arum lilies crisped and curled. A bee died in the coffin floor. Ammu's hand shook, and her hymn book with her skin was cold. Esther stood close to her, barely awake, his aching eyes glittering like glass, his burning cheek against the bare skin of Ammu's trembling hymn book holding together their arm. Rahil, on the other hand, was wide awake, fiercely vigilant and brittle with exhaustion from a bare battle against real fire. She noticed that Sophie Moll was awake from her funeral. She showed Rahil two things. One thing was the newly painted high dome of the yellow church that Rahil hadn't looked over at from inside, and it was painted like blue. It was painted blue like the sky, with drifting clouds and tiny whizzing jet planes, and the white trails that crisscross in the clouds. It's true that it would have been easier to notice these things lying in a coffin, looking up, than standing in the pews, hemmed in by sad hips and hymn books. Rahil thought of someone who had taken the trouble to go up there with cans of paint, clouds for the white, blue for the sky, silver for the jets, and brushes and thinner. She imagined him up there, someone like Velutha, bare-bodied and shining, sitting on a plank, swinging from the scaffolding in the high dome of the church, painting silver jets in a blue church sky. She thought of what would have happened if the rope snapped. She imagined him dropping like a dark star out of the sky that he had made. Lying broken on the hot church floor, dark blood spilling out from his skull like a secret. By then, Estepin and Rahil had learned that the world had other ways of breaking men. They were already familiar with the smell, sick sweet like old roses on a breeze. Thing too that Sophie Moll showed Rahil was that bat baby. During the funeral service, Rahil watched a small black bat climb up a baby Kochama's expensive funeral, sang and gently clinked curled claws. When it reached the place between her and her sari and her blouse, her roll of sadness, her bare midriff, baby Kochama screamed and hit the air with her hymn book. The singing stopped for a "What is it? What happened?" and for a fur whirring and a sari flapping. The sad priests dusted out the curly beads with gold-ringed fingers as though hidden spiders had spun sudden webs in them. The baby bat flew up in the sky and turned into a jet plane without a crisscross trail. Only Rahil noticed Sophie Moll's secret cartwheel in the coffin. The sad singing started again, and they sang the same sad verse twice. And the more the yellow church swelled like the throat of the voices. When they lowered Sophie Moll's coffin into the ground, the little cemetery behind the church, Rahil knew that she still wasn't dead. She heard the soft sounds of the red mud and the hard sounds of the orange laterite that spoiled the shining coffin polish. She heard the dull thudding through the polished coffin wood, through the satin coffin lining, the sad priest's voice muffled by mud and wood. "We entrust in thy bands, most merciful Father, the soul of this our child departed, and we commit her body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." Inside earth, Sophie Moll screamed and shredded satin with her teeth. But you can't hear screams through earth and stone. Sophie Moll died because she couldn't breathe. Her funeral killed her, thus to that, to us. On her tombstone it said, "A sunbeam lent to us briefly." Ammu explained later that too briefly meant for too short a while. After the funeral, Ammu took the twins back to the Kottayam police station. They were familiar with the place. They had spent the good part of the previous day there. Anticipating the sharp, smoky stink of old urine that permeated the walls and furniture, they clammed their nostrils shut well before the smell began. Ammu asked the station officer And when she was shown into his office, she told him that there had been a terrible mistake and that she wanted to make a statement. She asked to see Velutha. Inspector Thomas Matthew's mustaches bustled like the friendly Air India Maharajas, but his eyes were sly and greedy. "It's a little too late for all this, don't you think?" he said. He spoke the coarse Kottayam dialect of Malayalam. He stared at Ammu's breasts as he spoke. He said the police knew all they had to know and that the Kottayam police didn't take statements from Vaishyas or their illegitimate children. Ammu said she'd see about that. Inspector Thomas Matthew came around his desk, approached Ammu with his baton. "If I were you," he said, "I'd go home quietly." Then he tapped her breast with his baton, gently, tap tap, as though he was choosing mangoes from a basket, pointing out the ones that he wanted packed and delivered. Thomas Matthew seemed to know whom he could pick on and whom he couldn't. Policemen have that instinct. Behind him, a red and blue board said, "Politeness, obedience, loyalty, intelligence, courtesy, efficiency." When they left the police station, Ammu was crying. So Esther and Raheel didn't ask her what Vaishya meant, or for that matter, illegitimate. It was the first time they'd seen their mother cry. She wasn't sobbing. Her face was set like stone, but the tears welled up in their eyes and ran down her rigid cheeks. It made the twins sick with feet. Ammu's tears made everything they had for her seem so unreal. They went back to I.M.N.M. by bus. The conductor, a narrow man in khaki, slid towards them on the bus rails. He balanced his bony hips against the back of the seat and clicked his ticket puncher at Ammu. "Where to?" The click was meant to mean. Raheel could smell the sheaf of bus tickets and the sourness of steel bus rails on the conductor's hands. "He's dead," Ammu whispered to him. "I've killed him." "I.M.N.M.," Esther said quickly before the conductor lost his temper. He took the money out of Ammu's purse. The conductor gave him tickets. Esther folded them carefully and put them in his pocket. He then put his little arms around his rigid, weeping mother. 2 weeks later, Esther was returned. Ammu was made to send him back to their father, who had then resigned his lonely tea estate job in Assam and moved to Calcutta to work for a company that made carbon black. He had remarried, stopped drinking, and suffered only occasional relapses. Esther and Raheel hadn't seen each other since. And now, 23 years later, the father had re-returned Esther. He had sent them back to I.M.N.M. with a suitcase and a letter. The suitcase was full of smart new clothes. Baby Kochama showed Raheel the letter. It was written in a slanting, feminine, convent school hand, but the signature underneath was their father's, or at least the name was. Raheel couldn't have recognized the signature. The letter said that he, the father, had retired from his carbon black job and was emigrating to Australia, where he had got a job as a chief of security at a ceramics factory, and that he couldn't take Esther with him. He wished everybody in I.M.N.M. the very best and said that he would look on Esther if he ever came back to India, which he went on to say was a bit unlikely. Baby Kochama told Raheel that she could keep the letter if she wanted to. Raheel put it back into his envelope. The paper had grown soft and folded like cloth. She had forgotten how damp the monsoon air in I.M.N.M. could be. Swollen cupboards creaked, locked windows burst open, books got soft and wavy between the covers. Strange insects appeared like ideas in the evenings and burned themselves on Baby Kochama's dim 40-watt bulbs. In the daytime, the crisp Incinerated corpses littered the floor and windowsills, and until Kochu Maria swept them away in her plastic dustpan, the air smelled of something burning. It hadn't changed. The June rain. Heaven opened and the water hammered down, reviving the reluctant old well, green mossing the pigless pigsty carpet bombing still. Tea-colored puddles the way memory bombs still. Tea-colored minds. The grass looked wet green and pleased. Happy earthworms frolicked purple in the lush. Green nettles nodded, trees burnt. Further away, in the wind and rain on the banks of the river, in the sudden thunderness of the day, Esther was walking. He was wearing a crushed strawberry pink t-shirt, drenched darker now, and he knew that Raheel hadn't come. Esther had always been a quiet child, and so no one could pinpoint with any degree of accuracy exactly when he had stopped talking. Stopped talking altogether, that is. The fact is that there wasn't an exactly when. It had been a gradual winding down and closing stop. A barely noticeable quietening, as though he had simply run out of conversation and had nothing left to say. Yet, Esther's silence was never awkward, never intrusive, never noisy. It wasn't an accusing, protesting silence as much as a sort of estivation, a dormancy, the psychological equivalence of what lungfish do to get themselves through the dry season, except that is in Esther's case. The dry season looked as though it would last forever. Over time, he had acquired the ability to get the blend into the background of wherever he was, into bookshelves, gardens, curtains, doorways, streets, to appear inanimate, almost invisible to the untrained eyes. It usually took strangers a while to notice him. Even when they were in the same room with him, it took him even longer to notice that he never spoke. Some never noticed at all. Esther occupied very little space in the world. After Sophie Moll's funeral, when Esther was returned, the father sent him to a boys' school in Calcutta. He was not an exceptional student, but neither was he backward. Not particularly bad at anything. An average student or satisfactory work were the usual comments that his teachers wrote in his annual progress reports. Does not participate in group activities was another recurring complaint. Though what exactly they meant by group activities, never said. Esther finished school with mediocre results, but refused to go to college. Instead, much to the initial embarrassment of his father and stepmother, he began to do the housework, as though in his own way he was trying to earn his keep. He did the sweeping, swabbing, and all the laundry. He learned to cook and shop for the vegetables. Vendors in the bazaar, sitting behind pyramids of oil-shining vegetables, grew to recognize him and would attend to him. Amidst the clamoring of the customers, they gave him rusted film cans in which to put the vegetables he picked. He never bargained. They never cheated him. When the vegetables had been weighed for and paid for, they would transfer him to his red plastic shopping basket. And always a sprig of coriander and a fistful of green chilies for free. Esther carried them home in a crowded tram, a quiet bubble floating on the sea of noise. At meal times, when he wanted something, he got up and helped himself. Once the quietness arrived, it stayed and spread in Esther. It reached out of his head and enfolded him in its swampy arms. It rocked him to the rhythm of an ancient fetal heartbreak. It sent its stealthy, suckered tentacles inching along the insides of his skull, hoovering the knolls and dells of his memory, dislodging old sentences, whisking them off the tip of his tongue. It stripped his thoughts of the words that described him and left them poor and naked, unspeakable, numb, and an observer therefore perhaps barely there. Slowly over the years, Esther withdrew from the world. He grew accustomed to uneasy octopus that lived inside of him and squirted its inky tranquilizer on his past. Gradually, the reason for his silence was hidden away and thrown somewhere deep in the soothing folds of the fact of it. When Kumchand, his beloved, blind, bald, incontinent, 17-year-old mongrel, decided to stage a miserable, long drawn out death, Esther nursed him through his final ordeal as though his own life somehow depended on it. In the last months of his life, Kumchand, who had the best of intentions but the most unreliable bladders, would drag himself to the top hinged dog flap built into the bottom of the door that led out to the back garden, pushing his head through it and urinate unsteadily, bright yellowly inside. Then the bladder was empty and conscious clear. He would look up to Esther with opaque green eyes that stood in his grizzled skull like scummy pools and weaved his way back to damp cushion, leaving wet footprints on the floor. As Kumchan lay dying on his cushion, Esther could see the bedroom window reflected in his smooth purple balls and the sky beyond. And once a bird that flew across. To Esther, steeped in the smell of old roses, blooded on memories of a broken man, the fact that something so fragile, so unbearably tender had survived and had been allowed to exist was a miracle. The bird in flight reflected an old dog's balls. It made him smile out loud. After Kumchan died, Esther started his walking. He walked for hours on end. Initially, he patrolled only the neighborhood, but gradually went farther and farther afield. People got used to seeing him on the road. A well-dressed man with a quiet walk. His face grew dark and outdoorsy, rugged. Wrinkled by the sun, he began to look wiser than he really was, like a fisherman in the city with sea secrets in him. Now that he'd been re-returned, Esther walked all over IMNM. Some days he walked along the banks of the river that smelled of shit and pesticides, bought the World Bank loans. Most of the fish had died. The ones that survived suffered from a fin rot and had been broken out in boils. Other days he walked down the road, past the new freshly baked iced Gulf money houses built by nurses, masons, wire benders and bank clerks who worked hard and unhappily in faraway places. Past the resentful older houses, tinged green with envy, covering in the private driveways among the private rubber trees, each a tottering fiefdom with an epic of its own. He walked past the village school that his great-grandfather built for untouchable children, past Sophie Mall's yellow church, past IMNM Youth Kung Fu Club, past the Tender Buds nursery school, past the ration shop that sold rice, sugar and bananas that hung in yellow bunches from the roof. Cheap soft porn magazines about fictitious South Indian sex fiends were clipped to the cloth pegs to ropes that hung from the ceiling. They spun lazily in the warm breeze, tempting the honest ration buyers with a glimpse of ripe, naked women lying in pools of fake blood. Sometimes, Esther walked past Lucky Press and old comrade K.N.M. Pillai's printing press. Once I'm in an office of the Communist Party were midnight, study meetings were held and pamphlets of rousing lyrics of Marxist party songs were printed and distributed. The flag that fluttered on the roof had grown limp and old, the red had bled away. Comrade Pillai himself came out in the mornings in greying Airtex vest, his balls saluted against his soft white munda. He oiled himself with warm peppered coconut oil, kneading his old loose flesh that stretched willingly off his bones like chewing gum. He lived alone now. His wife Kalyani had died of ovarian cancer. His son Lenin had moved to Delhi, where he worked as a services contractor for foreign embassies. If Comrade Pillai was outside his house, oiling himself when Esther walked past, he made it a point to greet him. Esther man, he would call out, in his high, pepping voice, frayed and fibrous now, like sugarcane stripped off its bark. Good morning, your daily constitutional. Esther would walk past, not rude, not polite, just quiet. Comrade Pillai would slap himself all over to get his circulation going. He couldn't tell whether Esther recognized him after all those years or not. Not that he particularly cared, though his part in his whole thing had by no means been a small one. Comrade Pillai didn't hold himself in any way personally responsible for what happened. He dismissed the whole business as the inevitable consequence of necessary politics. The old omelette and the eggs thing. But then Comrade K.N.M. Pillai was essentially a political man. The professional omeletter. He walked through the world like a chameleon, never revealing himself, never appearing not to, emerging through chaos unscathed. He was the first person in IMNM to hear of Rahil's return. The news didn't perturb him as much as excite his curiosity. Esther was almost a complete stranger to Comrade Pillai. His expulsion from IMNM had been so sudden and unceremonious and so very long ago. But Rahil Comrade Pillai knew well. He had watched her grow up. He wondered what had brought her back. After all these years, it had been quiet in Esther's head until Rahil came. But with her, she had brought the sound of passing trains and the light in the shade and light in the shade that falls on you if you have a window seat. The wall locked out for 10 years suddenly flooded in, and now Esther couldn't hear himself for the noise. Trains, traffic, music, the stock market. A dam had burst and savage water swept everything up in a swirling. Comets, violence, parades, loneliness, clouds, beards, bigots, lists, flags, earthquakes, despair were all swept up in scrambled swirling. And Esther, walking on the river bank, couldn't feel the wetness of the rain or the sudden shudder of the coal puppy that had temporarily adopted him and squelched at the side. He walked past the old mangosteen tree and up to the edge of a laterite spur that had jutted out into the river. He squatted out on his haunches and rocked himself in the air. The wet mud under his shoes made rude sucking sounds. The coal puppy shivered and watched. Baby Kochama and Kochu Maria, the vinegar-hearted, short-tempered midget cook, were the only people left in IMNM house when Esther was returned. Mamachi, the grandmother, was dead. Chaco lived in Canada now and ran an unsuccessful antiques business. As for Rahil, after Amu died, Rahil drifted. From school to school, she spent her holidays in IMNM, largely ignoring by Chaco and Mamachi, and largely ignoring baby Kochama. In matters related to raising Rahil, Chaco and Mamachi tried but couldn't. They provided the care but withdrew the concern. The loss of Sophie Moll stepped softly around the IMNM house, like a quiet thing in socks. It hid in books and fall. In Mamachi's violin case, in the scabs of the sores of Chaco's shins that she constantly worried, in his slack, womanish legs. It is curious how sometimes the memory of death lives on for so much longer than the memory of life that had purloined. Over the years, as the memory of Sophie Moll softly faded, the loss of Sophie Moll grew robust and alive. It was always there, like a fruit in a season, every season. As permanent as a government job, it ushered Rahil through into womanhood. Rahil was first blacklisted in Nazareth Convent at the age of 11. When she was caught outside her housemistress' garden gate, decorating a knob of fresh cow dung with small flowers, at assembly the next morning she was made to look up deprivating in the Oxford Dictionary and read aloud its meaning, the quality or condition of being depraved or corrupt. Rahil read with a row of stern-mouthed nuns seated behind her and the sea of sniggering schoolgirl faces in front. perverted quality, moral perversion, the innate corruption of human nature due to the original sin. Both the elect and the non elect come into the world in a state of total and alienation from God, and can of themselves do nothing but sin. 6 months later, she was expelled after repeated complaints from senior girls. She was accused of hiding behind doors and deliberately colliding with her seniors. When she was questioned by the principal about her behavior, she eventually admitted that she had done it to find out whether her breasts hurt. In a Christian institution, breasts were not acknowledged. They weren't supposed to exist. That was the first of the 3 expulsions, the second for smoking and the third for setting fire on her housemistress' false hairband, which, under duress, Rahil confessed to having stolen.